from the Washington Post. Washington Post and NBC News have really, really good updates dealing with coronavirus and what's been going on. Okay, so I want to look at some of those updates here. So we see that also today's Easter Sunday as well, Resurrection Sunday. We see a lot of people watching church services online. Easter ceremonies on Sunday looked as they never have before, with coronavirus restrictions discouraging or banning large-scale gatherings, including at churches. Some pastors went forward with in-person services. Debate about how and when to reopen the United States continued as the creator of an influential model predicted a resurgence in cases if rules ease on May 1st, while the nation's top expert on infectious disease says some restrictions could begin to be lifted next month. That's Dr. Anthony Fauci. What people have to understand about viruses, and when you study the 1918 Great Pandemic, or the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 and 1919, viruses hit in waves. Is not just one time, one and done. Viruses hit in waves. That second wave that hit in 1918, hit in fall 1918, that was worse than the first wave that hit in about March of 1918. Okay, so viruses happen in waves, and what happened in 1918 is that the virus mutated also. That's the other thing. Okay, so viruses hit in waves, and they tend to mutate as different waves come. Then there was a third wave that happened in early 1919, January, February, early 1919. There was a third wave that hit also. So we really have to understand history, because we've dealt with things like this. It's been over 100 years ago. It's been like 102, 101, 102 years ago. So most people alive today have not lived through something like this. But when we go back and look at that, and that was horrific. 50 million is estimated, 50 million to 100 million people worldwide died of the Spanish flu, dealing with the flu pandemic in 1918. 675,000 people here in the U.S. died. Okay, so we have to, and when we study that, and I've done a broadcast dealing with this, you can watch that at my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. They practice social distancing. They wore surgical masks. They canceled school. They closed down businesses, canceled churches, canceled special events. And we saw different cities reacted differently. There was a big parade in 1918 that took place in Philadelphia. Even though doctors and officials think things like this, they were saying don't have a parade. They had it anyway, and that helped to spread the flu faster. It wasn't the reason why the flu spread in Philadelphia, but it helped spread it. Whereas in, I think it was San Francisco, they canceled a parade that was going to take place. So when you look at the response from different cities, you see why certain cities were hit harder than other cities were hit. Okay, but all this deals with understanding history. And this is one of the reasons why we study history, to learn from the successes, to learn from the failures, so we don't repeat the same mistakes. Those that don't know history are destined to repeat it. So 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. JT, let me know if we have any callers. All right. Okay. Let's see here. So let's go back to the updates from the Washington Post. Okay, we'll go back to that. Hold on just a second. I'm trying to get this. The computer's running slowly. All right. And then I want to get to this big story from New York Times. New York Times had a big article from April 10th to April 11th. Black-owned businesses could face hurdles in federal aid program. Black-owned businesses could face hurdles in federal aid program. Minority business owners have always struggled to secure bank loans. Now, many banks want to deal only with existing customers when making loans through the government's $349 billion aid package. And your businesses are not going to be able to take advantage of the 349 billion that will. The ones that can definitely should take advantage of this, because this is a reallocation of taxpayer dollars. There's going to be a second bill. Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are already talking about it. Mitch McConnell tried to force one through, a horrible one, through this past week in the Senate. That was blocked. Democrats and members of the Congressional Black Caucus are trying to make this second one even better for small businesses, especially African-American owned businesses. Okay, so pay attention to that. While my computer updates, I want to go to this story here from, let's go to this one here from New York Times, so dealing with African-American owned businesses. So they talk about, this is an excellent article written by Emily Flitter, F-L-I-T-T-E-R. It's an extensive article, it's about 7 pages, okay? And all this stuff, you know, I print up, I study this. This is what I do. I'm not just a historian, I deal with current events as well. They talk about an African-American female entrepreneur named Yasmin Young, Y-O-U-N-G, Yasmin Young, who, and 4 years ago, Yasmin Young walked down the street from Diaspora Salon, the name of her salon, Diaspora Salon, which is the business she owns in Baltimore. And she went to the Bank of America branch where she has a business checking account. And she was thinking of getting a credit card, but from Bank of America. But when a banker there described the requirements that she would have to meet to qualify for a credit card, Yasmin Young says that she left feeling too discouraged to apply. She eventually got a card from Capital One, okay, and never thinking that the decision would one day bring her to the brink of disaster. So after she was forced to temporarily close Diaspora Salon because of the coronavirus pandemic, Yasmin Young tried to get an emergency loan under the federal government's $349 billion relief program for small businesses. And a lot of loans are the paycheck protection loans, that small businesses could get, that have under 500 employees, can get to cover payroll, to cover expenses, to cover the cost of leases, etc. And once again, this is an example of how government is impacting and regulating business. We've seen that you have 43 states that have stay-in orders, including the state of Michigan, the state of Maryland, where Yasmin Young is. Maryland, the governor there is Larry Hogan, who's a Republican. Here in the state of Michigan, where I am, it's Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who is a Democrat. And we see across the country that governors, various governors, have stay-in orders, and they're shutting down non-essential businesses, hair salons, tanning salons, nail salons, barbershops, gyms, okay, the gyms and the things like this, the fitness clubs. A lot of African-American owned businesses and other businesses are shut down by government. And once again, all of this, the overwhelming majority of this, was largely avoidable if you had competent leadership in the White House, paid attention to their presidential daily briefings, who paid attention to the information coming from the intelligence community, who paid attention to the scientists. There were warnings going back to at least to November New information just came out this past week. If we look at the article from, well, we can look as recently as April 12th, Associated Press had a big article, Signs Missed and Steps Slowed in Trump's Pandemic Response. Signs Missed and Steps Slowed in Trump's Pandemic Response. This is written by Jonathan Lemire, Zeke Myler, Jill Colvin, and Ricardo Alonso Zaldivar. I saw Jonathan Lemire interviewed by Chris Jansen on MSNBC, okay, today. And I went and pulled this article up, came out April 12, 2020 from the Associated Press. We go back to April 8th. If you saw the broadcast I did April 9th, dealing with 6.6 million people filing for unemployment. If you saw that broadcast, I talked about the article that came out the day before from abcnews.com, abcnews.go.com, April 8th, 2020, intelligence report warned of coronavirus crisis as early as November. Intelligence report warned of coronavirus crisis as early as November. As far back as late November, U.S. intelligence officials were warning that a contagion was sweeping through China's Wuhan region, changing the patterns of life and business and posing a threat to the population, according to 4 sources briefed on the secret reporting. Concerns about what is now known to be the novel coronavirus pandemic were detailed in a November intelligence report, November 2019 intelligence report by the military's National Center for Medical Intelligence, the NCMI, according to 2 officials familiar with the document's contents. The report was the result of analysis the report was the result of analysis of wire and computer intercepts coupled with satellite images. It raised alarms because an out-of-control disease would pose a serious threat to U.S. forces in Asia, forces that depend on the National Center for Medical Intelligence, forces that depend on the NCMI's work. And it paints a picture of an American government that could have ramped up mitigation and containment efforts far earlier to prepare for a crisis poised to come home. But when you have a president who has declared war on the scientists for 3 years, when you have a president who's at war with the intelligence community, you ignore things like this. You ignore the warning signs. And see, incompetent leadership costs people their lives. Elections have consequences. Incompetent leadership costs people their lives. The overwhelming majority of what's taking place right now was largely avoidable if you had somebody who was competent, who paid attention to this and acted accordingly. Then we saw Washington Post had a huge article. I printed this thing up. This was about 24 pages. New York Times, April 11th, 2020. They had a huge article. He could have seen what was coming behind Trump's failure on the virus. This one was 16 pages. The Washington Post had one that was about 24 pages that I printed up. This is from this past week, April 11th, 2020, Saturday, April 11th. He could have seen what was coming behind Trump's failure on the virus. An examination reveals the president, Donald Trump, I use that term president loosely, was warned about the potential for a pandemic, but that internal divisions, lack of planning, and his faith in his own instincts led to a halting response. This is a huge, everybody should read this article. This is a huge article from the New York Times from April 11th, 2020. Any way you cut it, this is going to be bad. A senior medical advisor at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Dr. Carter Mecher, M-E-C-H-E-R, wrote the night of January 28th, 2020, in an email to a group of public health experts scattered around the government and universities. The projected size of the outbreak already seems hard to believe, he said. The projected size of the outbreak already seems hard to believe, he said. Now, at that point, Donald Trump is talking about there was only one case and downplaying it. A month later, February 28th, when he was at a rally in South Carolina, Donald Trump said that this was the Democrats' new hoax. And you remember for a month, he said there's only 15 cases. Pretty soon it's going to be down to almost zero. Oh, there may be a zero in the number, but the number's not zero. It's over 500,000 cases right now in the US. It's over 500,000 cases. And it's even more. These are documented cases. It's even more than that because you have people who have it but can't get the tests. A week after the coronavirus case has been identified, I'm sorry, a week after the first coronavirus case had been identified in the United States, and 6 long weeks before Donald Trump finally took aggressive action to confront the danger the nation was facing, a pandemic that is now forecast to take tens of thousands of American lives, Dr. Carter Mecher was urging the upper ranks of the nation's public health bureaucracy to wake up and prepare for the possibility of far more drastic action. Now, the article goes on to say, quote, Dr. Mecher wrote to the group, which called itself Red Dawn. He wrote, quote, "You guys made fun of me screaming to close the schools," end quote. Now I'm screaming, close the colleges and universities. Now, Red Dawn is an inside joke based on the 1984 movie about a band of Americans trying to save the country after a foreign invasion. So his voice was hardly a lone voice. His voice was hardly the only voice. Throughout the month of January 2020, as Donald Trump repeatedly played down the seriousness of the virus and focused on other issues, an array of figures inside his government, from top White House advisors to experts deep in the cabinet departments and intelligence agencies, identified the threat, sounded alarms, and made clear the need for aggressive action. You remember when Donald Trump said, when he was running in the 2016 campaign, he said, "You're going to have so many wins that you're going to get tired of winning." You remember that? Are you tired of winning yet? 17 million people filed for unemployment in the past 4 weeks. You tired of winning yet? He wants America to be number one. America's number one in the number of documented cases of coronavirus. You tired of winning yet? Elections have consequences. When he asked African Americans, what the hell do you have to lose? The correct answer would be everything. The correct answer would be everything. There's less African Americans today that have health insurance than when President Barack Obama left office. The quality of air has deteriorated over the past 3 years because the Trump administration has reversed or weakened 95 environmental regulations. You have a lot of African American owned businesses that are not going to survive, the detrimental impact coronavirus is having on the economy. The correct answer would be the correct answer would be, what do you have to lose? Everything. We go back to the article from New York Times, and we'll get back to this other one from New York Times and with Black-owned businesses. All this is tied together. All this is tied together. This is why when I heard people in 2016 talking about we're not going to vote for president, we're just going to build businesses, do economic empowerment, invest in the stock market. I'm like, do you understand that politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement? And politics regulates your business. You got Black-owned businesses right now shut down, and if they open up, they're going to be fined. That's government dictating what you do with your business. And then the businesses that stay open, they can only have 5 people in the lobby. They're regulated. African-American owned restaurants in general in the state of Michigan and other states, Illinois, Ohio, they can't, there's no dine-in service. It's only takeout service. No dine-in service is only takeout service, which is restricting the revenue for businesses, especially African-American owned businesses. Earlier this week here in the state of Michigan, I heard the statistic that 1/3 of restaurants in the state of Michigan are not going to survive this economy because of the coronavirus. 1/3 of restaurants in the state of Michigan are not going to survive. If 1/3 of restaurants in the state of Michigan are not going to survive, and those are mainly white restaurants, what do you think is going to happen to African-American owned restaurants? So when we deal with principles of political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans, then you understand, and this is something that I teach on, political self-defense. There's a term that I've coined. It's a whole concept. And one of the things in political self-defense is identifying people and candidates and elected officials who have an anti-Black agenda. Everybody wants to talk about a Black agenda. First of all, a Black agenda is not what candidates and elected officials present to us. That's what we present to them. A Black agenda is not what we wait on them to present to us. That's what we present to them. And a Black agenda gives you standards for you to evaluate various candidates and their policies by. So, but the first thing you have to do is identify those that have an anti-Black agenda, because the anti-Black agenda is worse than not having a Black agenda. When you deal with the policies coming from the Trump administration, this is an anti-Black agenda. If we look at, and I'm gonna come back to this article, see, once again, I told you, look, this is what I do. I do research. I got a ton of articles here. I'm not gonna be able to get through all this. But one very, very important article here, thegrio.com had one. I posted this on my Facebook fan page. The U.S. Postal Service is on the verge of collapsing if it doesn't get $89 billion that is asking Congress for to stay afloat. The U.S. Postal Service. African Americans are disproportionately employed by the U.S. Postal Service. If the U.S. Postal Service collapses, there's going to be thousands of African American jobs lost. And secondly, Donald Trump does not want people to be able to vote in the November 3rd, 2020 election by mail. He already said this past week, if people could vote by mail nationwide, Republicans would not win elections anymore. He already said that this past week. If we look at I'll just give you the title of this one. Maybe we'll have time to come back to this later. TheGrio.com, GRIO, had an article, and we posted it on my Facebook fan page, the African History Network. Postal Service running out of cash, and that may hurt African Americans. Postal Service running out of cash, and that may hurt African Americans. Donald Trump seems inclined to let the United States Postal Service die because he believes the agency needs to increase its prices, reported the New York Times. The COVID-19 crisis has hurt most major industries in the U.S., and the perpetually in debt Postal Service is no exception. The U.S. Postal Service has asked the U.S. Congress for $89 billion to stay afloat, insisting the agency will run out of money by the end of September 2020 if they don't get a cash infusion. Donald Trump may not be so eager to help, as he has long held the view that the Postal Service should charge on par with Amazon.com. Just last week, he rejected a cash bailout for the U.S. Postal Service. Donald Trump, the unstable genius, said, quote, they have to raise the prices on these companies who drop thousands of packages on the floor of the post office. Donald Trump told reporters at the White House this past Wednesday, they ought to do that. I'm pushing them. Now, Mark Diamondstein is the president of the American Postal Workers Union, which represents more than 220,000 postal workers. He argued politics were at play with Trump's reluctance to get involved. He said at the end of the day, they have an agenda: raise prices, reduce worker benefits, and reduce services, make it appear more profitable, and set it up for sale. The Postal Service is one of the country's biggest employers. As of 2018, according to Data USA, the agency employs over 330,000 employees with an average salary of $50,000 a year. While 67% of its employees are white, 21% of the agency's employees are African American. African Americans, 14% of the U.S. population, 21% of the employees of the U.S. Postal Service. Megan J. Brennan told the New York Times, quote, at a time when America needs the Postal Service more than ever, the reason we are so needed is having a devastating effect on our business. Postmaster General Megan J. Brennan told the New York Times. She said, quote, the sudden drop in mail volumes, our most profitable revenue stream, is steep and may never fully recover, end quote. Now, Megan J. Brennan told the New York Times that an expected 50% drop in mail volume since the same time last year could cripple the U.S. Postal Service, resulting in a reduction of regular mail delivery. A controversial mandate to pre-fund retirement benefits has also caused problems for the U.S. Postal Service, one of many moves viewed to cripple the agency and possibly privatize it. Because a lot of people are suspecting this is what Donald Trump actually wants. He wants the U.S. Postal Service to be privatized. So the post office is already on life support and has been reeling as bulk advertisers and others have cut back on their mailings given the realities of the COVID-19 pandemic. Postal workers, like those in warehouses, have been testing positive for the coronavirus. It has led to a reduction in staff across the country, multiple outlets have reported. Yet the Postal Service is still considered a place that African Americans can always find an opportunity to work. And I remember the movie Meteor Man, and let me know how much time we have left before the break, JT. The movie Meteor Man, starring Robert Townsend, okay, came out, I think late 80s, early 90s. I remember Helen Martin played either his mother or grandmother, the veteran actress Helen Martin. Helen Martin played the role of Pearl Shea on 227, the nosy neighbor who's always in the window. On the TV show Good Times, she was Weeping Wanda. She was Wanda, their neighbor in the projects, Wanda. And she said in the movie, there's always work at the post office. Because the post office, because it's federal government, that was one of the places where African Americans knew that we could work and get a fair shot, because it was the federal government entities were the first entities to institute and operate based upon affirmative action. Okay, that's Executive Order 11246, signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson. Okay, Executive Order 11246, dealing affirmative action. So you have this right here with the trouble that the U.S. Postal Service is in directly impacts the lives of African Americans. Yet the Postal Service is still considered a place that African Americans can always find an opportunity to work. Public sector jobs have allowed African Americans opportunities in many areas, more so than the public sector has, more so than corporations, things like this have. With African Americans making up more than 20% of the federal workforce, according to the Associated Press. Read the rest of this article. This is from thegrio.com. Postal Service running out of cash, and that may hurt African Americans. What the hell do you have to lose? The correct answer, Alex, would be everything. Give me everything for $100 million. The correct answer, Alex, would be everything. That's a Jeopardy question. What do African Americans have to lose in the Trump administration? Everything. And we see a steady reversal of policies that President Barack Obama put in place. But I've asked this question before. If you're under the misconception that no gains were made under the Obama administration for African Americans, then how do you know what to protect? If you're under the misconception that no gains were made, then how do you know what to protect? How do you identify threats that are trying to reverse what you have if you don't have a correct assessment of what you have? If you didn't know that the Affordable Health Care Act gave health care to 3 million non-elderly African Americans who did not already have health care, then when a con man comes along and talks about we're going to have something much better, but can't tell you what it is. And right now, his Department of Justice is in court right now trying to repeal the entire Affordable Health Care Act and take away health care from 20 million plus people, including African Americans. What the hell do you have to lose? The correct answer, Alex, would be everything. So if we go back to this article here from, oh, now, first of all, people go to whitehouse.gov and get the document, progress of the African-American community under the Obama administration, progress of the African-American community under the Obama administration. Because I deal with facts and evidence. I don't deal with feelings and emotions. That document is still there at whitehouse.gov. Trump hasn't taken it down. That shows you category by category how policies from President Obama positively impacted the African-American community. That was up in like 2015, probably 2014 also. If we read that in 2016 before the election, it would have been a totally different outcome. This is what happens when you have bad information, you make stupid decisions. This is why you hear me say right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. When you have bad information, you make stupid decisions.